Thank you very much, Joanne. It's always a pleasure to be at the Carnegie Council. This book has a very simple message, the Second Arab Awakening and the Battle to Pluralism. It's so simple, this call for pluralism in the Middle East, that you think it should be self-evident. And yet it is not. In the Arab uprisings that have started and are still ongoing 3 years later, the word pluralism does not appear anywhere in the lexicon of those who have revolted against old regimes. We've heard about social justice, dignity, but no one yet is talking seriously about a process that would put in place the foundations for a democratic, for a pluralistic system that would be sustained, stable, and prosperous. I call it the Second Arab Awakening because, of course, as Joanne said, there was a first Arab Awakening, an intellectual movement that started in the maybe mid-19th century by intellectuals in many places in the Arab world that today are witnessing the same turmoils in Lebanon, in Syria, in Egypt, in Tunisia. And that movement, which was calling for the Arab world to get rid both first of Ottoman rule, then of colonial rule, later found its way into popular movements all across the Arab world that called for independence and in the end were successful in achieving it. The Second Arab Awakening started as popular movements around the Arab world. These movements have not yet been contextualized, if you will, into any kind of an intellectual framework. So that today we know more about what the movements were against than what they are for. Nobody yet has done that in a very convincing manner. And therefore, what we have seen so far with the Second Arab Awakening, in contrast with the first, which was a battle for independence that stopped there. The first Arab Awakening main shortcoming, in my opinion, is that it has battled for independence against despotic rule and then stopped there. Once independence was achieved, no Arab government, secular or, well, they were not religious then, no Arab government, progressive or conservative, truly gave pluralism and democracy any attention. No effort was done to build and put in place the foundations for true democracy. And that is basically the message of the Second Arab Awakening. If the Second Arab Awakening is to be successful, it cannot just be a movement against despotic rule. It also has to be a movement for pluralism. Pluralism, in my opinion, must be the operating system that would help lay the foundations for a prosperous and inclusive Arab society. My departure point, of course, is that the status quo was not sustainable in the Arab world. For those who today say, we told you so, the old system was better. We should have stayed with the old regimes in the Arab world instead of carrying out these revolutions. Well, the status quo was not sustainable. We did not have natural stability in the Arab world. That stability was artificially induced by autocratic governments that basically had a lid on society's aspirations for democracy and pluralistic rule. Once that lid was lifted, it is natural in the course of 3 short years, it is natural to see what we are seeing today. And therefore, I think there is no movement in history, no transformational process that took place in a short 3 years. We tend to forget that countries like Germany were a dictatorship until 1945. Spain and Portugal did not achieve democracy until the late 70s, early 80s. Countries of Eastern Europe did not achieve democracy, some of them probably not until today, until 89. And the list goes on. No one should expect in a region that, as Joanne said, did not experience a culture of democracy. No one should expect such democracy to really emerge in the course of 3 short years. So my first message is to exercise patience. People were too fast to call it an Arab Spring 3 years ago, and people are too fast today to call it an Arab Inferno or an Arab Winter. We are still witnessing the first page in a very long book along the way to democracy. And that does not ensure, of course, that all countries of the Arab world are going to end up with stable and prosperous cultures. It is also wrong to treat the Arab world as monolithic. We will see some countries succeed, we will see others fail, and we will see yet others struggle in the process. But there are some trends that we can already see, some of them certainly negative, but amongst the negative developments in the Arab world today, there are also some positive trends that we can already discern that are being ignored as people are more focused on the negative developments in the Arab world today. What concerns me most negatively at this stage is that so far, in many countries that have undergone transitions, it is still a zero-sum game between the secular and the religious elements. Both forces are, in some countries, not all, particularly in Egypt, secular and religious forces are engaged in a winner-take-all battle, where if the religious forces come to power, they behave in an exclusionist manner, as they have done in Egypt last year with the development of a constitution that did not enjoy consensus among all forces in society. But we are also seeing secular forces, once they come to power, engage in the same exclusionist policies that they accused the Islamists of doing before them. And so far as the battle in the Arab world is seen as a battle between secular and religious elements, so far as it is seen as a zero-sum game, the sum will be zero, in my view. If both forces do not work, maybe not together, but at least work for the development of a pluralistic society in which they push for the right for themselves to operate, but for others to operate as well. Unless they are able to do so, they will stay engaged in an exclusionist discourse, and what we will see is the replacement of one dictator or one set of dictators by another, and no more than that. There is a notable exception that no one talks about in the Arab world today, that in my view has the potential of being a model that many other countries can use on their way to a smooth transition to democracy, and that is Tunisia. Tunisia today has not been engaged in the same kind of exclusionist policies that we have seen among other Arab countries in the region. As we speak, Tunisians are probably voting today or maybe tomorrow, as we speak, on a new constitution. A constitution that has been arrived at by consensus, including all forces in society, religious and secular, a constitution so forward-looking that it is not just the best constitution in the Arab world, but probably among many other countries of the world, a constitution that upholds the right to free expression, the right to free belief or no belief, a first in the Arab world, full parity between men and women, full prevention of any force to deny any other force the right to operate, so a peaceful rotation of power at all times, etc., etc.